Good afternoon. I am Oscar Wendell, chairman of the think tank Global Strategies and represent a telecom provider, Carrier One, in the Middle East. It is a privilege to welcome you to this discussion today that could not be more timely on space and defense, France and Gulf perspectives. A year ago to the day, I stood at this exact same place to moderate a panel where one of the central questions was how to mitigate the risk of the Strait of Hormuz being blocked. With what has unfolded since, there's never been a more critical time or place for today's conversation. Over the past few months, we have witnessed an accelerating transformation of the global security landscape, one in which alliances are being questioned, if not shifting. Technology is redefining power, and nations are having to reassess what autonomy and sovereignty truly mean in a world of fluid digital borders. But defense cooperation has never been about equipment alone. More fundamentally, it rests on the diplomacy, trust, and shared sovereignty that allow nations to protect their strategic interests. France occupies a distinctive position here, having built some of the world's most advanced aerospace, defense, and space capabilities. France-Gulf cooperation is now entering a new phase anchored not in exports alone, but in co-development, knowledge transfer, and shared strategic interests. Space is where this shift is most visible. Space has moved from a domain of exploration to the foundation layer of modern security. Recent conflicts have shown that the invisible communications infrastructure that keeps modern societies running are the most critical, but also the most vulnerable. Today's conversation brings together leaders that represent each layer of resilience, from diplomatic and military strategy to the satellite infrastructure that underpins telecommunications, aviation, financial systems, and emergency services. We will begin with Major General Christoph Hinze, who recently returned from leading the NATO mission Iraq, that will bring the strategic perspective of the security landscape today and update us on his views of how he sees the current situation in the Middle East. Dr. Hamdullah Mohib of OrbitWorks will expand on the geopolitical macro perspective and discuss how the Gulf region is building sovereign space capabilities and industrial ecosystems, shifting from a consumer of advanced technologies to a contributor and innovator of the global space sector. Olivier Gulbert of Thales Alenia Space will define what resilience means in the space domain. Olivier Badard of the Armada Holding will widen this into the question of strategic autonomy, examining what true space sovereignty is and how it can be achieved, and the potential for regional collaboration in the GCC. Adel Hadoud of Infinite Orbits will address what it takes to protect and preserve the life of satellites. And joining us later will be Mark Chiesa of CGX Aero that will talk about how to defend and protect satellite navigation systems. And if we have time, I look forward to a conversation thereafter about potential space wars and how they will be fought in the future. So let me begin. General, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, Oscar.
You've recently returned from leading NATO mission Iraq. How do you see the geopolitical landscape evolving with the peace deal yesterday having been signed?
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. So, because you are talking about NMI, NATO mission Iraq, so I will speak a few words about the mission. So, this mission is first a non-combat advisory mission at the strategic level, and deployed since 2018, and at the request, and it's very important, of the Iraqi government. It's about 800 people, civilian and military, and among them 200 advisors from 28 countries. And the mission is to advise the Iraqi armed forces and Iraqi security forces and to stabilize the country, to fight against Daesh, and at the end to provide Iraq as a NATO partner. And we work over 29 long-term objectives, for example, digitalization, rationalization of equipment, restructuring, command and control, crisis management, simulation, and so on. Regarding your question, and I will be more focused on Iraq, I would say that after 1 year deployment, I can say that Iraqis are tired about war, about insecurity, instability, and clearly they want social and economic development. And above all, they want to stay far away from all regional or international tension. But we know very well that the last conflicts impact and show their weakness, the weakness of Iraqi sovereignty on their territory, but also on the air. But nevertheless, this fact, I would like to mention that I'm still very positive about the future of Iraq, and I see Iraq as a land of opportunity. Yes, of course, the new prime minister has many challenges. The first one is structural reforms, including fighting against corruption. The second one is to control all the weapons and all the militia who are very aligned to Iran. And the last one, of course, is to maintain a balanced position between American demands, disarmament of militia, and the influence of Iran, because Iran sees their militia as their first line of defense. But I can say, just to conclude this point, is that Iraqi authorities, like NATO, they want more NATO. They consider NATO as a stability factor, and they want to create more opportunity. So yes, Iraq is linked to Iran, of course. But I can say, after 1 year of key leader engagement, that Iraq is looking to the West and see his connection with NATO as a great opportunity to move forward.
Thank you very much, General. I'd like to bring in Dr. Hamdullah Mohib. Few men have as much experience as you do when it comes to what we're talking about here today, strategic resilience and trying to achieve peace. You represented Afghanistan as the ambassador to the United States, and you're now key in the relationship with developing satellites between the UAE and France with your ongoing initiatives. Before we transition into the discussion about the technical aspects of resilience and satellite infrastructure, could you give your view on how you see the recent developments, and if you could share some thoughts about what we can learn from the past and mistakes and create a peaceful future?
Thank you. I think the discussion of sovereignty, satellite, space, and security are all interlinked. Geopolitics has played a significant role, and I think every nation now realizes what they can and need to do to have sovereign space capabilities. Whether it's on the communication front, we saw Starlink, for example, being critical in Ukraine, and that is a key service to have. But at the same time, we see Earth observation, which is largely focused on imagery. But those capabilities are expanding beyond those. So maritime security, border securities, but it's also disaster management. There is also a lot of commercial applications that enable nations to do better, to serve their nations better, to protect their borders, and also provide services that perhaps were previously only the domain of Western nations. Mm-hmm. And where we play, OrbitWorks, is kind of that link to create capabilities that go beyond just Western nations and only those that can afford. We are creating satellites as a service and offering those capabilities to those nations who are perhaps more nascent, but still need to have some services without interruptions at key moments. And I think with that, the partnership that we have developed here with companies in France and what we've been able to do with CNES and other entities has been a cornerstone. One of the partner that we built OrbitWorks with is also a French-American company called Loft Orbital, and so it is through that partnership that we are able to create what we need to do for the future. But I'll stop there. I know there's a lot more experts here to talk about. The space part, I'm happy to come back to it later if there was time.
There will be. And now that we're kicking off the discussion on satellites and the topic of this panel, resilience, I'd like to ask Thales Alenia Space and Olivier to give us an overview for the layman. What does resilience in space actually mean?
Thank you, Oscar. Resilience, I think it's one of the basic of satellites. Because as you may know, but Adele will contradict me later on, once you have launched a satellite, there is no way to repair it, or there was no way to repair it before. That means that the satellite by itself should be resilient. There is only one example since decades. It's the telescope launched by US, which has been refurbished and refixed once in orbit, but it cost hundreds of millions, and it's not possible for on a global basis. But now we are facing new threats, and it's obvious when you see the different conflicts that we have currently, but before also. And those threats could be for the satellite or Earth observation, telecommunication, but also navigation. And you know how we rely on GPS, GLONASS, Galileo system. So the threats are multiple. The threats could be unintentional because of frequencies issue, but it could be also intentional, and there could be some attack from the ground to avoid satellite to transmit information. And the recent event in Iran demonstrated that the action could be extremely violent and could stop completely a satellite to transmit information. So this is a remote attack, and there could be also definitely some physical attacks. And we saw in the past some spy satellite turning around commercial or military satellite, and either to force the satellite to move, and that means to stop his mission, or to create some perturbation and some impact on the service itself. So this is one of the first threats that we are supporting and the end user are facing. The cyber attack is also essential, and that means that, as you understand, when you have the satellite up there, you have also a ground segment that is operating and deploying the service. So the ground segment itself should be protected. And as we are now in an open world, and that your ground segment will be connected to internet, you have many ways to enter into this ground segment and to create some issue. So the protection of the ground segment of our customer is also essential, and to allow to have some secured but shared information to the right users. Then we have also the evolution of the market itself. The satellite operators, the private sectors, has been facing a tough competition from actors like Starlink and others that will come. But as you mentioned, the Ukraine event recently, when Starlink decided from day one to day two to switch off their services, demonstrated that sovereignty is essential. You cannot rely on the business to business communication or business to government. You cannot rely on a private actor that will decide suddenly to stop the communication. So the emergence of new program has been accelerated by the needs and the requirement coming from the government to have sovereign solution. So this is where the dual-use satellite, as we call it, so a mix of commercial and military services, is becoming more important. And then there is the, as I mentioned, the Earth observation and the navigation. And we saw, as I mentioned, navigation is extremely critical on our daily basis. When you take your car, GPS and Galileo are used on a daily basis. And it occurs recently that you are supposed to be located in Riyadh, but finally your GPS tells you, oh no, you are not in Riyadh, you are in Daman. So, and it's because there are some jamming which are managed on the GPS and GNSS satellite. And it's where also we bring some solution to support and to resist to such kind of attack. So, you know, there are a huge variety of attacks that everyone is facing today, and it's where the resilience of satellite is becoming crucial and mandatory.
Thank you very much. And I think I've prepared a question here for the other Olivier. Talking about sovereignty, I think a key question that I would like to move on to is the opportunity of collaboration between the GCC countries and what that would look like. And to your point specifically, when you need it the most, you need to be able to count on the communications infrastructure. You've given this a lot of thought, Olivier. Could you share what the different options are in terms of securing strategic resilience?
Sure, my pleasure. I'll try to answer your question. I'll give you just a very 1-minute overview of 50-year history of satellite communication in the GCC or the Middle East, right? So 50 years ago, 21 Arab League countries founded Arabsat. Arabsat was and is an international government organization owned by a number of countries in order to mutualize their capabilities in terms of satellite communications. And then what happened? 20 years ago, one of the largest shareholders, the UAE, this is public, decided to create their own satellite communication operator, right? Then Qatar did the same. Then Saudi recently, 2 years ago, announced that they were also creating the same. Egypt has since then launched also military satellite communication assets that are fully sovereign. So just to highlight, and Oman just recently announced also that they were launching their own national and sovereign program. Right? So what does that tell us? Cooperation is a must, but cooperation in this particular field started 50 years ago, and then ultimately, each and every country has the desire, the need, the ambition to develop sovereign capabilities. So, and another example fairly recent here in Europe with what is happening really between Germany and France as far as low latency LEO connectivity is concerned. France has invested or reinvested massively into Eutelsat OneWeb, so really Eutelsat. The German MOD is saying, well, this is a constellation or a connectivity solution that is too French, I want my own. So I think we are facing a moment where cooperation is a must. Friendly nations and neighbors want to work together, but I think that the ability to cooperate is linked to the ability to actually be, number one, sovereign, to be independent, and that gives an actual leverage to negotiate partnerships or cooperations on a regional basis. And again, this is, after all, Vision Golfe, so this is between France and the GCC countries. So we can see that what is happening in Europe is also happening in the GCC. And by the way, it's not only happening in SATCOM, because if you look at intelligence, space-based intelligence capabilities, same thing happened. I'm only talking about public information, right? The UAE acquired sovereign assets roughly 10 years ago, launched them in orbit. It's widely known that other GCC countries are actively pursuing the acquisition of similar sovereign intelligence assets, and whether it's low Earth orbit or geostationary orbit, doesn't matter. But in this case, it's low Earth orbit. So I think going forward, if you, again, map the same story on the European front, every large European country have their own space intelligence programs. So I think cooperation is a must at regional level between friendly countries, but cooperation can only happen if there's a, quote-unquote, a level playing field amongst the parties that want to cooperate, and if each party brings actual sovereign capabilities. That's a way to probably implement a more balanced cooperation, because everyone brings, quote-unquote, assets or capabilities or use cases or services to the table. But it's also a way, to some extent, to regain full independence if and when, as Olivier was mentioning about Starlink deciding suddenly to switch off connectivity, LEO connectivity on a given country. If in your cooperation or in your partnership, something happens, making it more difficult to rely on third-party assets, you can always revert back on a fully sovereign, owned and operated asset. So it's quite a difficult mix, because it's a mix between sovereignty, independence, and the need and ability to truly cooperate going forward. And just looking at the same topic, we talked about just a bit the history of SATCOM and the history of intelligence satellite. In the future, I'm certain that in the GCC, we will see space-based early warning capabilities being implemented, developed, acquired, owned, operated, whatever the actual model. We will see sovereign capabilities being developed, but there will be also a need to see cooperation amongst the country, because each and every country cannot really have the full spectrum of capabilities fully owned on a sovereign basis. So cooperation, yes. Sovereignty, 100%, in particular in light of what we've seen over the past few months. But it's like walking on eggshells, pretty much. It's a difficult balancing act, one much required, much needed, but one that needs to be looked at and monitored on a almost daily basis, I'd be tempted to say.
I guess the challenge is who puts in the money. He who pays the piper calls the tune. It's difficult in any collaboration or cooperation, military in particular. I imagine that, as we've seen through history, and not least with infrastructure projects between nations, it easily descends into an argument of who's paying for what. Can you see a solution where you sort of get more influence depending on how much you're paying?
I mean, clearly, the more you pay, the more you expect to own or to have so-called industrial return, like we've seen in Europe over the past many years. But clearly, what does it take? Owning sovereign capabilities in space is expensive and is, in many cases, not commercially sustainable, right? So it's a desire and a willingness and a political will to have independent and sovereign capabilities in space. And how do you make it work, right? You allocate budget accordingly based on the sort of capabilities you want to develop. ESA, European Space Agency, during the last ministerial conference in November, has recorded contributions from the ESA member states higher than it's ever been the case. Germany is spending, or has officially declared they were going to be spending in excess of 25 billion euros in space. If you want to own and operate sovereign assets, you need to spend money. You need to allocate capital. You need to make it a political priority somehow.
I think now with the SpaceX IPO, the amounts of money that has been invested and being expected to be invested, ROI is of course a central question if we're going to get our money's worth for this. And I'd like to bring in Adel Hadoud, Infinite Orbits. I think that specializes on this very question on maximizing the utility of the satellites in orbits and protecting them. Could you tell us a little bit about satellites as strategic infrastructure? How important is it and how possible is it to protect these satellites and to extend their life?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Thank you. Brought me to contradict the two Oliviers, and you put me in the middle. But I think I'm just going to build on what they both said. Satellites were built to be resilient. It's of the most resilient assets ever, simply because you cannot go there and fix them. At least that's the past. And from an ROI point of view, it's also a capacity that is very expensive to have, and the ROI is not always easy to reach if it's purely a commercial story. Infinite Orbit was created around these two concepts of resilience assets that are very expensive, and how to make them even more resilient to access them, basically. So now action in space is possible, and it's the concept of going to an asset that is in space that we thought resilient. It's not resilient anymore because people can go to it and actually touch it and maybe move it or blind it or jam it, etc. So Infinite Orbit was created around that. The first commercial use case which make them more resilient is to give them life extension. So essentially keep in orbit a satellite, an asset that is worth 400 million euros, sometimes longer than it is expected original life, by docking to it and keeping it in orbit longer. And we work with various GCC partners to do that. And also from an ROI point of view, it's usually a continuity that we offer to our customers to maintain an asset in space and maintain the ground segment, talking to it, the customers talking to it longer at a much lower price, because you do not have to replace it as it is, or you can delay the replacement. And hence the name infinite orbit. So we give infinite lives, it's not really infinite, but longer lives to space assets. And there is definitely a need that we see today in the GCC. The few countries Olivier talked about have all geostationary satellites, some of them reaching end of life, and they all need them to live longer and be more resilient.
And specifically on the threat of satellites being shot down, as was gained a lot of media attention this year with the Chinese having a laser where they could shoot down low Earth orbit satellites. How can you protect against this?
I wouldn't use shoot down, probably. It's happening both in LEO orbit, but more importantly, actually, in GEO orbit, because in GEO orbit, the satellites are much more sovereign, much more expensive, bigger, and they have been blinded. So simply you have a satellite, hello, you don't have a satellite anymore. So this is a reality, yeah? This is not Star Wars. I think you mentioned Star Wars. This is a reality of today. I guess the first level of resilience is to tell your opponent who's planning to access your satellite or get close to your asset in space that I can get close to yours as well.
Yeah.
So your ability is deterrence. Your ability to be, as an operator, as a sovereign nation, to make it close enough in proximity of another nation's assets. A satellite is an extension of your sovereignty in space as a nation. Landing or getting close to a satellite that belongs to another nation that holds another flag, like a ship, is like landing a helicopter on a ship that has a flag of another nation. So it's potentially an act of war. And if other people are able to do it, you need to be able to do it. That's the first level of defense. Obviously, this can get sophisticated through jamming, spoofing, laser. You mentioned laser, and maybe other things we don't know of. But the simple fact of being able to operate closely to an asset in space is already an act of resilience and self-defense.
What I'm hearing is that we're looking at an arms race for the satellite capabilities. And long term, is that realistic? I mean, it's not going to benefit anyone that we're just protecting our satellites for a potential of an all-out war that, if it even happened, would make space useless for everyone because of all the garbage that would be in space. I would like to ask an open question. Is it not possible to have interdependencies between all parties? Now we're seeing the Americans with SpaceX and Bezos developing their constellations, the Europeans with their constellations, and the GCC, as you were talking about, their collaborations. In the bigger picture, can you see a scenario where everyone is interdependent and benefits the capacity of satellites overall?
I'd be happy to take a stance. I don't think so, because at the end, the appetite for sovereignty and national ambition, national objectives, and just make it impossible to see a full interdependent. The minute you're interdependent in space, that means I can go sit in the back of your car, I'm driving your car, I have my traffic going on your satellite, going back into your ground station, and I lose, somehow you lose, but I lose also a lot of sovereignty from the assets that I've deployed in space. So it's a bit like defense system. You know, people say usually if you really want to have like a regional alliance, you should have a central bank with the same currency, you should have a integrated defense system, and you should have at least, and speaking under the control of His Excellency, former ambassador, you must have diplomacy that somehow speaks one voice, right, one way or the other. This is very difficult to achieve. It's very difficult to achieve. And what happens in space is no different than what happens in the ground, under the control of the general now, about, you know, defense system. Who has the ability to have truly interoperable defense system amongst regional allies? Very difficult.
Ned, first of all, the audiences know there is no war going on in space. It's one of the areas that we have been able to collaborate even at the peak of war. There is an international space station. The Americans and the Russians and the Europeans have all been collaborating, so no one panics. The second is that, Olivier was talking about the early warning satellites. We're actually building, the constellation we're building out of the UAE is called Altair, and we are very fortunate to have even French clients on this Altair constellation, which is an early warning. Normal Earth observation satellites are just about taking imagery. These satellites have multiple sensors and onboard compute. So instead of tasking a satellite to take a picture for you, it can give you scenarios. And now we can see so much from space. Let's say with hyperspectral payload, we can see oil spill, gas leaks, we can see thermal, so we can see population movements. And so you can start to trigger satellites to give you information on the go. At the moment, the way the satellite industry operates is from the time a picture is taken until it's converted to intelligence, could be up to 6 hours, and sometimes even more, depending on the arrangement you have with the satellite provider. And something that people don't also often talk about is, just like Starlink, Earth observation satellites also cut off their imagery during the peak of the war because they're serving their main client, which usually is their own country's MOD. And there is only so many pictures you can take. There is only so much space there is on and what you can send back. And so, and at very least, there is delay in the receiving of that information. And so it puts nations at a disadvantage. My take would be slightly different to what Olivier is saying. I think the reason Europeans have not been able to compete with the Americans as much is once America is big, it has a lot of resources, and there is a bigger use for. Whereas in Europe, there has been more of a divided approach. In the GCC, we hope not to repeat that mistake, but in fact, collaborate with Europe more closely. First of all, the markets are not big. These are, as Olivier said, and as well, it's huge. These are big investments. And so to be able to collaborate is where we can perhaps get the best results out of it. And I see that collaboration increasing with current geopolitical environment between GCC and Europe. We certainly at OrbitWorks are pushing for that to be the case, so that we have not only a GCC-wide collaboration, but also collaboration with Europe. And I also would say that sovereignty for only maybe a couple of nations it's possible to have end-to-end supply chain, and that's not possible for everybody. And so a lot of that sovereignty can be also guaranteed on mutually exclusive agreements on the supply chain, on partnerships, so that we develop something, you develop something, and that you collaborate, and that interdependency makes sure that everybody is collaborative and acts upon it. Last, I wanted to say that once again, on the security front, you mentioned that satellites were shot down. I wish that was the case. You can't shoot a satellite down. It stays there. And the debris, unfortunately, creates an environment in which the flight of particularly in low Earth orbit, satellites crash quite significantly. And this is one area where there has also been significant diplomacy on the part of the UAE to create this space situational awareness and to reduce future debris in space. And so that will require a UN type of collaboration when it comes to space, something that we still don't have and need. Thank you.
So I want to bring the discussion back to the other Olivier. You've mentioned in our preparation for this panel that Thales is involved in 80% of financial transactions. And having lived through the months of the military operation earlier this year in Dubai, of course, this was on top of everyone's mind, financial transactions. if they would get disrupted. That, I think, is a key part of resilience. Can you share a little bit of your thoughts of what can be built up to secure infrastructure in the financial world?
So yes, the example that I have taken, it's to demonstrate that the critical infrastructure are not only for military purposes. Financial aspect is key for all of us, and definitely the contribution of Thales as the major provider of a cyber system to protect those transactions demonstrates the capacity of Europe to be in top of this kind of solution. In terms of protection, I think we have also to play and to use that diversity of space. Space, as you understood, there are multiple orbits, GEO, MEO, LEO, and what is important is like for when you want to have some suppliers, if you have a single source suppliers, you may have a risk to have some shortage and to have some issue. So it's the same for satellite. Never rely only on one single solution. So the multiplication and the diversity that you could have could help you to support any attacks or any threats that you will face. On the GEO, we are 36,000 kilometers, so it's very difficult to be attacked physically by a missile. Where on the LEO, as you mentioned, there was this physical attack with the laser that created thousands of debris. Hopefully, as you mentioned, there are some coordination, because if there is a massive chaos on the LEO orbit, there will be impact for everyone. Huh? It's like the nuclear protection. If someone is launching a nuclear bomb, the other one will launch it. So it's an auto protection. So it's the same in space. If you create debris on LEO, all the other services, not only the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the Indian, the European, will be impacted. So it's a kind of chicken and eggs, and so they just have to show that they can do it, and that's it. So hopefully, I think it will remain like that. But to come back to the diversity, I think it's very important for private entities, and you mentioned Eutelsat that invested massively in OneWeb constellation, but they have also their GEO constellation. SES merged with Intelsat, and they have some GEO, MEO, and later on they will have some LEO satellites. So, you know, this diversity to be able to serve efficiently the different customers are essential. And Thales in space, like other actors, but especially us, we are present in all those fields. And it's why also when we discuss with a government or a private entity, they are interested by this diversity to be able to answer to any of their requests.
Thank you very much. I would like to do a quick round for the last couple of minutes that we have. What will be the most critical thing for France to remain a strong partner in the space sector for the coming decade?
Well, I think quickly, but access to launch is key. France is one of the few nations in the world who mastered that and still mastering that at a scale where no other country is probably going to do that through Ariane. I think through some of the companies that are here, also there is a clear collaboration with the GCC that is happening. There is, what I see, acceptance of French technology in that area of the world, and I think investing from both sides in that area, I think is really key.
If I may, I think the key would be access to space. Fully agree with Adel, but just to give a different perspective, I think somehow we are close to being a bankrupt country, so somehow we're going to have to find the way to finance our ambition going forward in space. It's a fact. That level is so high that it's very difficult to invest more. Nevertheless, we have the technical know-how. We have good training capabilities, good university, good people. We're going to have to partner in order to diversify the sources of funding of our ambition in space going forward. That would be my statement.
We're here to enable that. And in fact, what we did on the Altair constellation was exactly that. The French needed early warning satellites that we invested in, built in the UAE, that we can then now use for French territories as well. And as we go forward, I think partnership is going to be a continued focus. If there was anything that I would add, would be perhaps lesser bureaucracy and faster movement.
Always.
There is one thing I think is essential is partnership, collaboration. I will give you 2 examples. Sometimes it's true that in Europe it could take more time than in US, and especially with some private actors. But Galileo, to my point of view, is today the best navigation system in the world in terms of resilience, in terms of performance, and it has been demonstrated and understood by most of the users. And the second constellation that Europe is launching, IRI², it's quite unique because, in fact, as you know, Europe is multiple countries, and they succeeded to converge on a budget, which is huge, but they are also open to collaboration. And we receive a lot of requests from external non-European countries willing to be part of IRI², coming from everywhere in the world. And this collaboration, this partnership is key for me for the long term and the liability of a space domain.
Thank you. And I'd like to give the last word to you, General.
Yes, so my subject is very far from satellites because NATO Mission Iraq is on the ground. But we can find some common pictures. And I think one or 2 parameters of the success is first, not wanting to impose one solution. It means respect the country's sovereignty and the country's willing. The second one is coordinating the actions of all actors. And it's quite difficult. So it's quite difficult for the satellites, but also quite difficult at my level when I was training and advising Iraqis, because there is sometimes difficulties to identify the interest of the others. So we need to find a common interest, and sometimes it's quite difficult.
Thank you very much, but I think we will get there. It's been a pleasure.